Get an idea of what it's like. I actually watched Deadpool the other night again because I'm watching through the X-Men movies because I missed some, and I'm like, okay, how do they all fit into whatever multiverse timeline things that the new movie's trying to set up? So, I guess we'll have a squiz. I don't know how old this guy is, but I'll see. That'll be irrelevant. Anyway. I have watched someone else react to it, and then I had thoughts on like, well, that'll be good for on here.
This is a scene from Joss Whedon's The Avengers.
I forgot Joss Whedon did it
before. In fact, you've probably laughed at it before. I know I did back in 2012, along with every single other person in the entire cinema. And realistically, how could we not? It was such a surprise, such a hilarious subversion of the classic villain monologue. I mean, think about it. It's literally the filmmakers picking up all the serious tropes we've become accustomed to over the past 100 years, and saying to the audience, hey, you and I have both seen this scene thousands of times before, right? We both know what you've come to expect from this stuff, so how about we just throw this formula around like a rag doll and try something new?
So I wonder about how that's received when you're not really aware of the years and years of building up of knowing things. Like if a young kid that hasn't watched many movies and stuff before have watched it, they probably still have a laugh at it because of the base joke. But I wonder if you get a bit of a test group, how much of a reaction you get out of it.
In the moment, This seems like a really exciting proposition. I mean, come on, an era where stories are sentient, an era where movies know they are movies and which can therefore create this new age relationship between
blow my nose. Right.
Storyteller and audience, one which is interactive and two-sided, which knows our expectations and therefore knows how to play with and subvert them. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out a few things. Lots of things, actually.
There's subversions that are funny, and there's subversions that feel like a slap in the face. But then there's also subversions that are done in a good way. And some of the ones done in a good way can also be funny, but that's more when you're not expecting.
Starts by revisiting a story I briefly told in my recent video on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, and why they remain virtually untouchable 20 years on. For some reason, I missed out on these movies throughout my childhood. I don't know why. It just never occurred to me that I should watch them. So by the time I did eventually sit down to view the trilogy, I think I was 17, and by then was very much accustomed to the cynical, self-aware, ironic style of storytelling which had grown throughout the 2010s to dominate movies, and to a lesser extent television as well. Now, to this day, I'm pretty ashamed by what I'm about to tell you, but anyway. Fellowship of the Ring begins, we hear Cate Blanchett's narration, and I'm thinking, okay, this is pretty cool. It's a bit overly serious, but whatever. And we get to the bit with Sauron, and we see this villain who kind of looks like he's from Power Rangers, and Galadriel is talking about a place called Mount Doom, so obviously I brace myself for the joke, for the moment where this ridiculous tension is broken, and it just doesn't come. So
see how people are being conditioned by so many things as that they expect there to be a joke. And like certain kinds of movies, I do go into that now because like, okay, this is a Marvel movie, this is a Disney movie, isn't gonna just have jokes and things.
I think, fine, that was the prologue, whatever. You can't really make jokes in the prologue. Then we get the whole
He's making a point, and I think when he talks about it is pretty good, so let him finish. As far as I know, he isn't memeing. But that's the thing, right? He was 17 so many movies came out that if you only watch new stuff, how would you ever experience tension and setting the atmosphere and some stuff like that? Like, especially in that opening scene with Sauron and Galadriel and that.
And I see all these little guys running around the place, smoking weed and making these weird faces. It all feels rather camp, rather silly, especially once the wizard in the pointy hat arrives, and so
Yeah,
once
exactly.
again I brace myself for this.
That brain rot, but that's that's what I'm saying is like, look how people have been conditioned. By Marvel and Disney movies.
Self-referential joke for the film to acknowledge how bizarre this all is, and once again no such joke occurs. And this basically happens for the entire trilogy. Like, you think I would have gotten used to the tone after a few scenes, but no. My brain had been so molded over time by so much postmodern wink wink nudge nudge storytelling that it could just not recognize sincerity. Now let's
and there are jokes in that, but they fit in the universe rather than being self-aware meta jokes. There's a bit of that because it's like, this is his experience, right, of encountering it for the first time, it seems like, where everything else that he really watched and paid attention to had done the meta self-aware stuff. Like, I don't think he's saying there aren't jokes at all, but to him it feels more serious because there aren't the fourth wall breaks or the self-aware jokes and that.
actually stop for a second and think about how crazy that is. Because Sincerity is not some outlandish storytelling.
Well, not even mildly, but Asperger's syndrome have issues with social cues and understanding others because they haven't experienced that before. Where I've grown to be a lot better with it, but there's still a part of that I try and relate that to something I've read, and that's my experience of it, rather than, I don't know what other people think, but that's an exception, I guess, compared to the norm. I'm not saying he does, but I'm giving an example.
Device,
Anyway,
only used by
I'll
those
see
daring few
what we're
writers and
continuing on.
directors. No, Sincerity, since the dawn of time, has been the very essence of storytelling itself. Like,
Neurodivergency isn't an excuse for anything. Because I have it mildly, and now I can empathise and understand other people's points of view, so I'm not using that as a way to say 100% this is something, but how would you say it? It's an expectation. Sure, what he was expecting. Oh yeah, I'll continue on and see what else he says. But it's like, people don't think. That's why they can only understand what they've experienced before. That's the casual crowd. They don't think.
Imagine having this conversation with someone even 50 years ago. They probably wouldn't
Later.
even understand what you were talking about. For millennia, stories were told to convey truths, to share human experiences, to evoke genuine emotion. From ancient myths and legends to classic literature, to television and cinema. Sincerity has been the core element that binds the audience to the narrative. It's the fundamental ingredient that allows us to resonate so deeply with stories. Sincerity is what makes characters relatable, struggles compelling, and triumphs uplifting. Now look, I'm not saying that every story...
He's saying it's been there for millennia. But I think that age of the meta self-aware type jokes is what's new. And that's kind of maybe his point. But I feel like even some other movies, I don't know what he'll bring, I forget, or don't know what he'll bring up movie-wise afterwards, all, in a way, tend to try and have their own sincerity. Like watching Deadpool recently. It has parts with its own sincerities, and I think that's why I don't mind it quite as much as some of the other MCU movies, is because rewatching it, it did have parts of its own sincerity in the story, even though a lot of it was full of jokes. They didn't try to undercut the serious moments with jokes every single time. At least that I noticed. There's definitely heaps of jokes, but a lot of that was more when he was in the Deadpool persona than when he was Wade Wilson. And some of it was in the flirting whatever with Vanessa.
Has to be this serious thing which dramatically changes our lives. There is absolutely a place for humour, for irony, for stories that don't take themselves too seriously.
He's probably reading a script.
For movies which know they are movies and have fun with that premise. In fact, this kind of storytelling can be incredibly refreshing and entertaining when done right.
I love Iron Man 1, and the first Captain America movie was really good as well. And I liked the 2008 Incredible Hulk and that stuff. And the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy balanced it really well, I think.
However, when this becomes the default, when every film in the cinema feels the need to follow trend by shying away from...
What is this? Is this from a new movie? This from one of the new movies I haven't seen. What the heck is this Goop Monster?
Earnest emotions or genuine stakes. A lot of problems tend to arise. Problems which films with a more sincere approach would just never run into. First of all, that amazing thrill of having your expectations subverted, that rush of excitement you get when a movie is meta, self-aware, ironic, well, it has extremely diminishing returns. Like I said earlier,
it could be. I haven't seen it.
2012 when Hulk picked
I haven't seen anything of it.
Around like a
Maybe I
ragdoll.
just
But I imagine if you watched that scene today, it just wouldn't be that funny. But what?
That's the thing. I find that a lot of the jokes are good for watching once, or like in a few years after you forget what most of them are. And then you go, oh yeah, haha. Deadpool was 2016. I hadn't watched it since then. And it worked well enough for me on a rewatch.
Why? Well, first of all, the joke has been done a million times.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything
in both
about
every Marvel movie and basically everywhere
but
else.
A lot
on
of the
this,
Marvel movies haven't been doing well.
Self-referential jokes are essentially the same, just with
Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, you know that they were just trying to translate what everyone sitting around the table playing D&D were doing. Like every single session in a Star Wars Saga Edition RPG sessions, we're always laughing at something that someone does that's ridiculous, or the dice rolls go bad, or too well for what they were saying, and it turns out a hilarious moment.
With slightly different coats of paint. Like, sure, you can subvert expectations, break the fourth wall, play on pre-established tropes in as many different ways as you like. But let's face it, the joke is pretty much this. Hey, you're watching a film, and we know it. Like, that's it. That's the whole joke, done over and over and over again. And a huge problem with this formula, other than it becoming stale very quickly due to ridiculous overexposure, and it not being that clever or funny in the first place, is that it makes what is supposed to be unpredictable and subversive, predictable and boring. And in my opinion, the single best example of this is Thor Ragnarok, a film which I personally find to be rather overrated. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like every single line or joke in Thor Ragnarok is...
I don't know what people generally think of each of the MCU movies, but the original Thor was still the best one. I like the origin movies, probably because they take themselves more seriously, because it's the origin of the character, or they were released at that time before the MCU was really getting jokey with everything, Because I find that the main problem with a lot of the extra jokiness and the comedy that they try and do is that they undercut a lot of serious moments.
Some meta-ironic quip which winks at the audience. But a lot of them are, and they're so frequent that it doesn't take long for you to predict when they're coming. Again, because they're essentially all the same joke. Like, the movie starts with yet another villain monologue, and we have this joke where Thor slowly spins away from the villain, and yeah, it makes your nose exhale slightly, maybe. And then the film gets back to the villain monologue and you think, alright, well, let's hear what the guy has to say. And then they just do the exact same joke again, like 10 seconds later, and you just think, what's even the point of this? If you're just...
I think also some of it can work, but it's the quality of writing, right? It's like, yeah, you could do the joke once, and he goes, yeah, you can exhale a little bit, maybe. But then they do it again, it's like, who in the writing room thought that was a good idea? And what kind of writers do you have on these things?
Just gonna pull the rug out from under me every single time. I'm gonna very quickly pick up on what you're doing and learn when to jump over said rug. Does that metaphor make sense? Like, the thing that made this tone somewhat work in the beginning is that it was surprising and unpredictable, but I'm afraid to say that that ship sailed long ago.
And you had the majority of the movie, if I remember correctly with the Avengers, you had the majority of the movie where it was more serious and it wasn't full of those jokes, whereas the writing has the movie's full of those jokes now.
Long ago, leaving us with, well, what exactly? To be honest with you, I'm not really sure, but whatever it is, it feels quite nasty, you know? Like a trick is being played on us, like we're being gaslit by someone who doesn't really respect the audience, nor the material they're responsible for, which is kind of surreal to say out loud, but that's where we now find ourselves.
Oh, what a great point to pause for after that statement. Yes, it feels like they don't respect the source. Like, if I knew the Marvel source material, it would probably feel very disrespectful to a lot of them to be the way that they are with that. Deadpool works because Deadpool's always been that sort of character. Like, as far as I'm aware, I read Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. I've seen Deadpool in Lego games a bit and stuff. That's always the kind of character he's been. But when you have every movie the same, basically, there's that. And then you have also the blue one. I wouldn't even call these movies, as are pictured here, on the pause part, full of jokes. They're just full of bad writing and bad subversion that doesn't seem to respect the source material.
Like, there's this one film which I'm sure no one's ever heard of before called The Last Jedi. I think it's the 8th episode of this epic space opera saga thing, and there's this one joke in it where we see this huge ship landing, and the cinematography and the music seem to be leading us to some big reveal. And then it turns out to be an iron. Like, it's an iron. Ironing some
I don't even
clothes.
remember that.
Now look, I can actually see how someone could find this moment kind of witty, and look, I'm not gonna argue against that. However, I would argue that the brief laugh this moment may perhaps offer is nowhere near worth what it takes away. Because this joke basically feels like the creators of The Last Jedi, whoever they may be, making fun of us and punishing us for taking any of this seriously. It almost feels...
I think that's a great way to say it. They're trying to punish people for taking any of it seriously. Like, one of the great things I find in the expanded universe, to tie that back in, is you have a lot of jokes and things, but they make sense in the universe. And they're not overdone. If you're talking about the meta self-aware jokes, none of them really do that except for some of the Infinities comics.
For taking any of this seriously. It almost feels nihilistic. In fact, no, what am I talking about? It is nihilistic. A moment like this wouldn't feel out of place in Spaceballs, you know, the film that was made to take the piss out of Star Wars. And now it's appearing in the real thing. Like, this is the point we've arrived at. There's a great video essay you should watch by The Closer Look about The Last Jedi's comedy, and in it they continuously bring up this word bathos, which basically means an anticlimax created by a lapse in mood from the sublime to the trivial or ridiculous. It's a film presenting us with something that could potentially be rather emotional or epic or
I've just memory hold a whole heap of it,
at the last
apparently.
second and going, we got you. You thought it was going to be serious, but we were one step ahead of you. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's basically appeared in every single modern blockbuster created within the Hollywood system. And it is this type of joke which I believe to have caused the single greatest problem of this entire meta-ironic era which Hollywood currently finds itself in. You know?
I would say older Hollywood didn't do this as much. It's a lot of modern writing things, especially like how he says,
on the majestic human specimen that they
"Oh,
were
hey."
following.
That's a really weird name. I'll just call you Guy. Hello. The sound alerts might be broken. They didn't work earlier. I don't know why. Voice changer. Okay. Oh, was it 5 minutes? Oi! What you got right on here? I've got a wheel to spin for that, because that was easier than people trying to do things. Yeah, there's subtle comedy and there is comedy that situational makes sense in the things. I just put the names of the voices on here. Let me see. Let me check it's working. Never mind. Wait, that's not it. We'll do another one because that one shouldn't be on the list. It's in alphabetical order. I haven't done the voice changer a whole lot. That's what it's called in the voice changer program. That's why I put it up there. There. You redeem the Bloomer voice changer, so you get a cringe voice.
Like this. This is the voice. Alright. Yeah. That works. Somehow. It's an AI one, so it sounds weird. That's 4 minutes. Let me double check. It's been a while since I had to do it. Five minutes, yes. Possible benefit, I mean, the name is kind of weird. Anyway, I might. I would have totally broken the voice changer. I don't feel like I'm going to be actually seriously talking about stuff with this voice changer on. What have they got in the comments? No, I'll lose my train of thought if I go into something like we can watch that. Name the lock up instead of. Yeah, I don't know, the voice changer doesn't seem to be wanting to work. The voice changer sounds worse. It's weird.
It
Here we go. Here's the ring. The welcome before.
began with the forging of the great rings. Yeah, so did my marriage, and we all know how that turned out. One does
He's not even in shared married a bed. Well, I'll finish this.
not simply walk into Mordor. Well, what if we took like a running start? Frodo, I swore to protect you. But can you protect me from yourself? Well, I'm flattered, Frodo, but honestly, you're not really my type. These
But
are no common
if he's no
mindless
longer in
orc.
chat, I'm not going to bother.
These are Urukai. Gesundheit. It's true you don't see many dwarf women, when in fact, they are so alike in voice and appearance.
Account suspended or deactivated. And I'm not even paying attention to this.
They're often mistaken for dwarf men. Legolas knows about that. Ask him about the winter solstice of 87.
Surely I'm the majestic human specimen that you are following.
I'm going to continue watching this. I think that I could make a rule that if someone redeems something like the voice change, I could wait till I finish talking about the video and then do it. That'll work. Yeah, he must have been lurking for a while. Anyway, what was I thinking with this?
System. And it is this type of joke which I believe to have caused the single greatest problem of this entire meta-ironic era which Hollywood currently finds itself in. You know what I was saying earlier about how sincerity is the core element which binds audiences to stories? The fundamental ingredient that allows us to resonate so deeply with cinema? Well, then it would make sense that insincerity achieves the opposite, creating a barrier between the audience and the story that they're watching. It's funny really, because a movie acknowledging that it's a movie is usually referred to as breaking the fourth wall, yet
So something I've noticed with this is you have insincerity, right? And then you have a lot of the people that like this kind of stuff are the casual fans that go, oh, I didn't think about that, when you ask a question that's actually thoughtful as part of the analysing the story, or you were thinking about that. Like I had that with The Last Jedi, where I asked someone that said they loved it, whatever, a question about a plot point that doesn't make sense. I don't even remember what it was now. But then they just go, oh, I didn't think about that. You get those sorts of people that just go, oh, eat popcorn, haha, rather than actually engaging with the story properly. Oh, the wrong window clip.
as breaking the fourth wall. Yet I would argue that a better term would be strengthening or refortifying the fourth wall. And the more frequently this wall is acknowledged, the more sturdy and opaque this barrier between audience and film becomes, the more we all come to expect this ironic style of storytelling, the less we are going to want to emotionally invest in films in the first place. Because what's the point if every movie is just going to make fun of itself, make fun of you for ever thinking that it might take something seriously? This is why my initial reaction to The Lord of the Rings was one of confusion, because I
So, well, I
so
might talk
used
about
to
that
films
point
like
afterwards.
these gaslighting me and making fun of me and making fun of themselves and consistently avoiding actual stakes or real emotions. When I was eventually met with Sincerity from a major studio blockbuster, I thought this must be some sort of trick.
Well, the way he's describing it reminds me of like a Bugs Bunny cartoon or something, where it's like, okay, whatever happens to the characters in the episode, there's no real stakes, and there'll just be jokes throughout. And some of them I think are even a bit fourth wall breaking, because if I remember right, Bugs Bunny breaks the fourth walls and talks to the audience a bit and stuff. Who knows?
I'm not going to offer up my heart to this trilogy, to this experience, because, well, I've been hurt so many times in the past, and I know how this goes. The second I get invested in any of this, some hobbit is going to come out of a bush, smoking his pipe, and laugh at me for taking any of this seriously. And that, my friends, should just not be happening. Like, that is such an unnatural response to a piece of art. So, what is the solution to all of this?
I mean, art is very loosely defined. I feel like everyone should be making fun of art, that they're not engaging with on a serious level sometimes. But I mean, not all of it's meant to be engaged seriously in that way. That's something I think you have to make the point of. Is like, it is entertainment. There is a place for those jokes and things, but it is why a lot of the newer movies tend to lose audiences, because the story itself doesn't take itself seriously.
Because like I've already said, it's not that I think that this meta sort of humour doesn't have any place in modern cinema. Well, I have a few ideas. First of all, I don't really think movies can have their cake and eat it too when it comes to this stuff. Like, I find it so bizarre when the Deadpool movies, for example, which, let's be honest, essentially exist to make fun of superhero films, to break the fourth wall, and to have Ryan Reynolds make a ton of dick jokes. I find it so bizarre when even those movies are suddenly trying to form some sort of emotional connection. Like,
so these are the parts that I thought, it tries to have its own sincerity. It doesn't hit as hard, of course, because the rest of the movie is a bunch of jokes and things. But it does try to have its own sincerity and try to form a story here.
no. Any attempt at sincerity feels so out of place when you've spent the entire runtime taking absolutely nothing seriously. Another Hollywood franchise which I think...
And I was like, okay, it's Deadpool. There's a point where you can take Deadpool seriously, I think. But you lose it because so much is buried in the jokes, rather than just know most of the runtime is whatever. There's actually first parts of the movies, and then they break for jokes a bit and whatever, because they don't really want to have tension. That loses it amongst the jokes a bit, and you kind of already know what's going to happen, rather than you have a bunch of the other superhero origin movies that don't even reveal who the superhero is till like halfway or 3/4 of the way through the movie, and just have a human story that takes itself seriously. And then he could become Deadpool. But of course, even in these moments, it's like, yeah, he does his jokes, but that's his general personality anyway.
I'm taking absolutely nothing seriously. Another Hollywood franchise which I think has sadly run into this problem is the Fast and Furious films. Now look, I know these movies, and most of the other movies I've spoken about in this video, are not exactly the pinnacle of cinema, but I do think that the Fast and Furious series is a pretty interesting case study when it comes to a franchise gaining self-consciousness, if you will, halfway through its lifespan. This series begun in the early 2000s.
Hang on, it's not dead yet. They'll still come out with Fast and Furious 11 and 12 and whatever, where now they're gonna have a colony on Mars or something.
As your standard illegal street racing Point Break ripoff. However, the series, in my opinion, did not hit its peak until its 5th installment, which came out in 2011, 1 year before Joss Whedon changed everything with the Avengers. Fast 5, for me, is not just the zenith of this franchise, but honestly, one of the best dumb action movies of the 21st century. Why? Well, because Fast and Furious was not yet this huge meme. The creators were not yet in on the joke. Yes, this film is stupid, but it also takes itself pretty seriously. The thing moves at a great pace, the set pieces are explosive and well directed, the characters are likable, but most importantly, it's earnest. It's not trying to make fun of itself. And because of this, it's actually rather wholesome. You find yourself really buying into all the vehicular, masculine...
Well, I was wondering if the one that came in and followed afterwards was just an alt account or something. That's why I didn't really say hello to that person.
Poetry, in a way you probably just wouldn't ever expect to. And then the mid-2010s happened. The Fast and Furious franchise became aware of its own existence, of its own legend,
just
of its
freaking
own
just
meme.
flexes.
The creators got in on the joke, and it lost what made it special in the first place. It became a parody of itself. And yeah, that kind of thing has happened before, but they still try to do the emotional stuff, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't land because you can't really have it both ways. Or should I say, it's very difficult to have it both ways. I do think that on the rare occasion, when executed properly, you can have like one self-aware joke in your film.
Yeah, so I can click on his and it says, well, I'll show you, why not. It just says the account has been suspended or deactivated. When I click on his name in the chat and pop out the thing. So, yeah. There it is, it's bigger.
One instance where your movie recognizes that it's a movie, the audience laughs, and then we move on from it. A great example of this,
one or two movies is fine.
sticking to the whole villain
one or two
monologue thing,
moments.
is this moment from The Incredibles.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing.
I don't even see this.
Now this isn't...
I don't even see the syndrome joke here as one of these meta self-aware jokes, because they live in a superhero society where every single villain would be used to monologuing, and it would be sort of a trope inside of the movies, inside of its own universe, and that I know of. So yeah. It's not like, oh, you know you're watching a movie and so this joke works. It works for us as an audience a bit because we already have an understanding of superhero movies and common tropes. But in universe, this joke works as well. I think that's what I like about that particular example as well.
Now this isn't the deepest, most meta joke ever told before, but it is funny. Why? Well, one, because it's really not that self-referential, like, let's be real, this is a pretty innocent joke. And two, the rest of The Incredibles is sincere. Sure, it has jokes, of course, it's a Pixar movie, but nothing too self-aware, nothing which takes you out of the experience.
I think that's the biggest thing, is like they're overused so much that people are getting sick of them now. And they're used to cover up bad writing, I think.
Which stops you from emotionally investing into the stakes
too.
of the story. So again, I do think that you can include the odd meta joke in your movie if you really want to, but it needs to be handled incredibly delicately. Of course, what's probably easier...
Riff Tracks was banned off YouTube out of interest because they got hacked or something. And then I saw a tweet from them saying that they were not able to have their YouTube channel back or whatever. It was weird.
Than this is to just go full Charlie Kaufman and completely embrace the art of meta storytelling, or go full Tarantino and wholeheartedly embrace the art of homage. And I have indeed had tons of fun with films like these, but if you're not willing to go all the way with this stuff, perhaps just stick to the original source of storytelling. Pure, unfiltered sincerity. This doesn't mean abandoning humor altogether, but rather...
Yeah, because there's a lot of jokes in a lot of sincere stories that just work really well. It's like Indiana Jones is sincere. You clearly have jokes in that. Star Wars original trilogy is sincere. You clearly have jokes in those that are diegetic. There's some terminology. So diegetic music is music that's in the movie that the characters in the movie can hear and all that. And non-diegetic music is music that only the audience can hear, that the characters inside of the story or in the movie or whatever can't hear. So when you have diegetic jokes, they fit in the universe and they would make sense to the characters in the universe, but if you have non-diegetic jokes, they would only make sense to the audience, not the characters in the universe.
Rather ensuring that it serves to enhance the emotional depth and authenticity of the narrative, rather than detracting from it. Fortunately for us, there does seem to be a growing trend in Hollywood at the moment that seems to signal a return to this sincere approach. Movies like Top Gun Maverick and Dune Part 2 have demonstrated that studios are once again down to craft narratives that are earnest and emotionally resonant. And I think the audience response to both of those films says a lot about what we truly want from this beautiful medium deep down. Perhaps we'll never get another Lord of the Rings, a series you'll be glad to hear I now love and appreciate with all my heart. But in this quest to reclaim the forgotten currency of sincerity, we might have gotten something even better. We might just rediscover that the most epic tales are the ones that dare to be genuine, to be earnest, to embrace the sublime beauty of unfiltered truth. You're waiting for me to make a joke, aren't you? To relieve
He just made a joke by saying that.
the tension after that emotional monologue. Well, I'm not going to.
He's literally doing it by saying that.
Thanks for watching.
That is a kind of meta self-aware joke that is exactly what he's referring to. Like the Ferris Bueller's Day Off post-credits scene. Which worked so well in the cinema. Because Ferris Bueller's Day Off is serious all throughout the movie, and then you sit through the credits. Yeah. That's dumb.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.
It's not like these jokes are new.
Go.
It's not like the jokes are new. But I do think you get an issue then if you're starting to go the other way with what you're doing with movies. So I'm not very keen on the trend of we have to reboot this franchise to be grim, dark and depression, when the original is not like that. An example I've heard about is Sabrina the Teenage Witch. They rebooted that, where it was originally a comedy series, and then they've made it some grim, dark, it has to be really serious. And doesn't work in my opinion, although I haven't watched that particular one. Yeah. It's not been... It's really popular because it appeals to the casual audience, right? And I think the overall point that he's making is just a lot of those, like, substance and... there's some things that just lose what could be great movies because they put all those jokes in, and I think that's a writing issue. A banana taped to a piece of paper is art, technically. So where do you draw the line on the definition of art? Cinema is an art form. I guess Hollywood is just known for being back on. Oh, yeah. Dolphins painting whatever on a piece of paper with a brush with their mouth is considered art. There you go, there's another one. Random whatever's on a piece of paper are considered an art. But if you're talking about, that's cinema, like people meme about Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino and stuff. There's certain ones that feel a lot more like an art form. It's like... What's a recent one which was really good? A more recent example would be like No Country for Old Men. The sound design, the writing, the tension in parts are an art form. And when you do it really well, you're like, wow. Whereas you have 13-year-old Marvel McCinema face writing the script with his, my meta self-aware jokes. And it's like, okay. And yeah, that's something as well. As like a lot of the movies, like, cool, tell the story about that superhero. Because so much of this infects the MCU. That's what it was like the origin stories. Captain America. Even the origin story for Doctor Strange, I think, didn't have that many jokes in it. But the good marker is, ever since the Avengers came out, I started putting more of those jokes in, and then as the MCU keeps going on, it just seems to have movies that are more full of those jokes. Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of a different discussion, because I'm sure there's people that do work on those movies that are envisioning something and then working towards their vision of it, but they're not probably the producers or the directors. Because I do find I watch the older Marvel movies and I do enjoy them more. When did Iron Man 3 come out again? Yeah, the entertainment industry has become so huge now, and especially with it not being nerd things, that it's becoming infected by business people that would prefer to make money over making art. Whereas you need a business mindset for some things, otherwise you'll totally lose anything. That's the business part that takes over, usually, in Hollywood. Because I feel like they've put in more and more of those jokes over time to see how much people will put up with. Yeah. Movies are a form of art. Painting's a form of art. Photography's a form of art. Photography's a form of art, and then movies are just lots of pictures put together, high speed. And then you can combine the art of music, the art of sound design, and the art of visuals into a movie. It's probably the most different forms of art put together that we have. Apart from maybe video games, where it incorporates this sort of art of designing a player experience of people going through the game. I guess that could be another aspect that's added in these video games.